And she leaves acting. She leaves Hollywood. She's gone. Some people might say that's sad. Others might say, well, she saved her own life.
Christy McNichol was once one of the most loved stars in Hollywood. She began acting at a young age, quickly gaining fame for her natural talent, warm smile, and unforgettable performances. By her 20s, she had already won 2 Emmy Awards and starred in hit shows and movies that made her a household name. But just when it seemed like her career would last forever, Christy suddenly disappeared from the spotlight. Fans were shocked. There was no warning, no public explanation, only silence. For years, people wondered why someone so successful would walk away at the peak of her career. Now at 62, Christy is finally ready to share her truth about why she left Hollywood. But before we begin, if you're a fan of Christy McNichol, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel. As a child, Christy McNichol didn't enter Hollywood through fame or fortune. She slipped in through the back door thanks to her mother's patchwork of odd jobs. Her mom, Carolyn, wasn't chasing red carpets. She was just trying to pay the bills. From working as a secretary to selling makeup and even taking bit parts as a movie extra, she did whatever it took to keep food on the table. One day, while working a small role in the low-budget movie Bigfoot, Carolyn brought her kids, Christy and her older brother Jimmy, along to the set. It wasn't a glamorous outing. She simply didn't have a sitter. Jimmy, obsessed with monsters and movie magic, loved every second of it. Christy, however, was terrified. She stayed in the car the entire time, too anxious to even step onto the set. But even from the sidelines, fate took notice. A crew member caught sight of the kids and casually told their mom they'd be great for commercials. Just like that, a door opened. Soon both Christy and Jimmy were auditioning. What started as commercials quickly turned into sitcoms. Jimmy found work steadily. But Christy had something special. She didn't just perform. She lit up the screen. By age 14, she landed the role of Buddy on the Emmy-winning series Family. That part didn't just launch her career. It defined her. Overnight, Christy became a household name. But she wasn't your typical teen star. She had a gravity well beyond her years. Even off-screen, Christy felt like she was living life backwards. She wasn't the kid in the house. She was the one cleaning it. She once told her mother, "You're the child," to which her mom replied, "And you're the mother." It wasn't said in jest. It was their dynamic. While other kids were out riding bikes or sneaking candy, Christy was tidying up, managing the house, and asking when her mom would be home. The lines between parent and child were blurred. When she began working on Family, she treated it not as a dream come true, but as a full-time job. "I was like a miniature adult," she later said. "I'd go off to work every day with a little briefcase." And it wasn't just an act. Christy brought a deep maturity to Buddy's role, playing a teenager who asked the tough questions and challenged the world around her. The audience saw it, and they connected. While most kids her age were still figuring out who they were, Christy was already being praised, judged, and scrutinized by millions. She didn't ease into adulthood. She skipped childhood entirely. And though the spotlight made her a star, it also cast long shadows. By the time Family wrapped in 1,980, Christy McNichol had already filmed nearly 100 episodes and was seen as one of TV's most composed young stars. But behind the scenes, she was barely 18 and emotionally drained. That same year, she took on the lead role in Little Darlings, a coming-of-age film that became iconic but added to her growing exhaustion. Christy later admitted she never really said no to anything, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know how. Her need to please, especially her mother, meant she was constantly working. "Before I could even say yes or no," she recalled, "I'd be on a plane to a new set." Work consumed her life, leaving little room to live it. Outwardly, she remained calm, professional, almost too perfect. But inside, something was shifting. After Little Darlings, Christy began acting out in subtle ways: food fights, pranks, moments of rebellion, as if trying to reclaim a childhood she never had time for. "It was like I wanted to live my childhood under," she finally said. It was a bittersweet realization. While the world saw a polished young actress, Christy was quietly mourning the youth she'd lost in the glare of the spotlight. Christy McNichol's star, soared in the late 70s thanks to her breakout role on Family. But her talents stretched far beyond television. She remained in the public eye, not just through acting but also through music, often alongside her older brother Jimmy McNichol. In 1977, she shared the stage with Karen Carpenter during The Carpenters at Christmas, singing beside a legend whose own life was marked by quiet tragedy. The following year, Christy and Jimmy released a self-titled pop album filled with youthful charm and sibling harmony. Their cover of He's So Fine even cracked the Billboard Hot 100, peaking at number 70. They would collaborate with the Carpenters once more on the Christmas portrait, blending a sense of family warmth with the glow of celebrity. Together, Christy and Jimmy became one of the most recognizable teen duos of their era, bright, talented, and seemingly unstoppable. But behind the glossy covers and television appearances, Christy was quietly unraveling. The relentless pressure, demanding schedule, and constant need to meet expectations began to wear her down. Fame, which once felt exciting, became exhausting. Eventually, it all caught up with her in the form of a major emotional breakdown. In that difficult chapter, Jimmy didn't hesitate. He stepped in, not as a co-star, but as a protective big brother. He moved in with Christy, offering calm, steady support when she needed it most. Their bond, forged in childhood and tested under the heat of fame, became her foundation. When everything else felt uncertain, Jimmy was her lifeline. By the time the 1980s rolled around, Christy McNichol was no stranger to the spotlight. Having grown up in front of America's eyes, she had quickly gone from a precocious child star in Family to one of the most in-demand teen actors of her generation. Between 1977 and 1983, Christy appeared in 8 films, a staggering workload for someone barely out of high school. Among them were standout performances in Little Darlings, The Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia, Only When I Laugh, and White Dog. Each film cemented her reputation as more than just a pretty face. She was a performer with real range, able to bring both warmth and emotional grit to every role, but the pace was relentless. The final film in that whirlwind stretch was Just the Way You Are, 1984, a drama in which Christy played a musician with a physical disability, a woman trying to find love and acceptance while hiding behind a leg brace. It was an ambitious role, one that required emotional vulnerability and subtlety. The film was set to shoot in Paris, and on paper, it looked like a dream, but Christie's mind was unraveling. As the production date neared, her anxiety spiraled out of control. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and was plagued by fears she couldn't explain. With nerves boiling and the unshakable gut feeling that something was wrong, she turned to her manager and confided in him, hoping he might help her navigate what felt like an emotional storm. Instead, she was met with a brush-off. "Don't worry, we'll get through it." It was meant to reassure her, but in truth, it left her feeling abandoned. She later reflected on that moment with heartbreaking clarity. She had reached out for help, for someone to truly listen, and no one did. Despite everything inside her screaming to stop, Christy was put on a plane to France. Once there, her condition only worsened. Her weight dropped to 96 pounds. She barely slept, and when she did, she was haunted by vivid, disturbing dreams. In her waking hours, she trembled with anxiety, often crying alone on set, in her trailer, or anywhere she could find a moment to break down in peace. She described herself as a wreck, and by then it was clear she had hit a breaking point. When a holiday break in filming gave her a brief escape, Christy returned to California and finally found someone who would listen, a close friend who took her to a specialist, a doctor who worked with adolescents in emotional crisis. That doctor didn't just diagnose her, he saw her. He told Christy she was holding on to years of unexpressed anger and pain, buried so deeply she hadn't even known it was there. Her childhood hadn't allowed her the space to feel those things, let alone process them, and now all of it was rising to the surface. The doctor urged her not to go back to France, not to finish the film. And for the first time in her career, Christie listened to her own needs. She stepped away. It was a radical act of self preservation for a woman who had spent her life trying to meet everyone else's expectations. But Hollywood isn't always kind to those who pause. During her year long break, rumors exploded. Tabloids speculated wildly, branding her a drug addict, an alcoholic, or mentally unstable. The studio's vague statements about a chemical imbalance only fanned the flames. The truth that Christie was struggling with severe anxiety and depression was buried under a landslide of gossip and judgment. She once said, "I think it would be easier to kick that kind of habit than go through the years of hell that I have." The mental health crisis she was living through was invisible to the public eye, and the world she once dazzled now felt cold and cruel. She eventually returned to finish Just the Way You Are, but her comeback didn't reignite the magic. Roles became fewer and less impactful. Films like Love, Mary, and Dream Lover failed to capture the public's attention the way her earlier work had. And even when the projects had promise, like You Can't Hurry Love or To Moon Junction, they often came and went without much notice. Then in 1988, Christie found stability again, at least on the surface, in the NBC sitcom Empty Nest, the spin-off of The Golden Girls. She played Barbara Weston, a police officer and one of the central characters in a warm ensemble cast. The show ran for 7 seasons, and Christie appeared in over 100 episodes, quietly rebuilding a career that many thought had ended. But even during those years, she was still wrestling with internal battles. Eventually, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, a revelation that helped explain the chaos she had felt for so long, but also signaled that something had to give. In 1992, during the 5th season of Empty Nest, Christie left the show citing health reasons. Though she briefly returned before the series ended, it was clear her time in front of the camera was winding down. The industry that had once embraced her now felt suffocating. Fame had taken her childhood, then her peace of mind, and now finally she needed to choose herself. In 2001, Christie made her retirement from acting official. She stepped away not out of failure, but from the desire to reclaim her life. "I was on the big stage between ages 8 and 30, she later said. "I left show business for a variety of reasons, but a big one was my interest in learning what else there was in life." Since then, Christie McNichol has lived a quieter, more private life, focusing on teaching, philanthropy, and finding healing on her terms. She came out publicly in 2012, sharing her truth to help others struggling with their identity or mental health, and has become a quiet advocate for self-acceptance. After decades in the spotlight, Christie McNichol made the rare and difficult decision to leave it all behind. Her exit from Hollywood wasn't marked by scandal or failure. It was a quiet stepping away, a necessary act of self-preservation. In 2001, her publicist released a simple but poignant statement on her behalf. "I retired from my career after 24 years. My feeling was that it was time to play my biggest part, myself." That single sentence said what her entire career had long overshadowed. Christie was ready to stop performing for others and start living for herself. In the years that followed, she embraced a life that looked nothing like the chaos and intensity of her youth. No more packed shooting schedules, no more red carpets. Instead, she filled her days with peace, choosing yoga, tennis, and long, quiet afternoons with her dogs. For someone who had spent so many years under pressure, constantly trying to meet expectations and please everyone around her, this calm was hard-earned and deeply personal. Christie didn't cut ties with the world entirely. She simply redefined how she wanted to be part of it. In 2012, in a deeply personal act of courage, she came out as gay. She said it wasn't about headlines or attention, but about helping others who might be struggling in silence just as she had once struggled. She knew the power of visibility, and she offered her truth as a quiet beacon to those who needed it. Though she never returned to acting full-time, Christie stayed connected to the arts in her way. She sang with the Los Angeles Valley College Choir and supported a local foundation that worked to protect music programs. For her, music wasn't just a hobby, it was a safe space, a healing force in a world that had often felt unstable. Music had always been her anchor, and she wanted to help ensure it could be that for others too. Now in her 60s, Christy describes her life as happy and serene. She has built a home rooted in calm, filled with the kind of contentment that once felt out of reach. And through it all, her brother Jimmy remains by her side, the same sibling who supported her through breakdowns and recovery, the one constant in a world that often felt too fast and too unforgiving. Will she ever return to the screen? When asked in 2015, Christie simply replied, "Never say never." But whether she does or not seems almost beside the point. Her career was, in many ways, lightning in a bottle, a meteoric rise that left its mark. But the price of that fame was a childhood lost and a mind pushed to the edge. Today, Christy McNichol is no longer trying to be what others expect of her. She's simply herself, and for the first time, that's more than enough. Her story, quietly powerful, remains a lasting reminder of why mental health, identity, and self-worth matter more than any spotlight ever could.